I never expected that Christmas would be the day I'd finally break free. I had everything ready, the carefully wrapped gifts, the holiday playlist queued up, even my favorite ugly sweater that I begrudgingly wore every year. It was supposed to be a good day. Maybe, for once, it wouldn't be a disaster. That hope shattered the moment I knocked on the door. The house, warm and glowing with festive lights, seemed to mock me as I stood outside. My arms weighed down by bags filled with gifts. I'd spent weeks picking out the perfect presents, something for Mom, something for Dad, for Mark, my brother, and his wife, Natalie. And of course, extra for the kids. No matter how messy things got between the adults, I always tried to make sure the kids weren't caught in the crossfire. But when Natalie answered the door, she hesitated. No smile, no welcoming hug, just an awkward, almost guilty look. Then Mark appeared behind her, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. "You're not coming in," he said flatly. I blinked. "What?" "You heard me." He adjusted his stance, filling the doorway like a bouncer at an exclusive club. "This isn't a place for losers." For a moment, I thought he was joking. I laughed, confused. "Seriously, what are you talking about?" His expression didn't change. "You don't contribute, Eric. You don't pull your weight. You're too busy living your little selfish life while the rest of us actually support each other." The gift bags dug into my fingers. My breath curled in the cold air, mixing with the sting in my chest. I looked past him, searching for Mom and Dad, waiting for them to step in and put a stop to this nonsense. Mom avoided my gaze, her fingers nervously adjusting the garland on the staircase. Dad was at the kitchen counter, pretending to be busy with something, anything, as if ignoring what was happening would make it disappear. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't just Mark being a jerk. This had been planned. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "Are you serious right now?" Mark tilted his head, as if considering. Yeah, I am." I stared at him, at the house, at my parents, who refused to even look at me. My mind raced through all the years I'd spent bending over backward for this family. The rent I covered when Mark was jobless. The emergency funds I handed over when they just needed a little help. The times I sacrificed my own needs because someone else needed me more. And now, because I dared to prioritize myself for once, I was being thrown away like an unwanted decoration after the holidays. Something inside me cracked. Not with anger, but with finality. I let the gift bags slip from my fingers. They thudded onto the porch, the sound cutting through the stillness of the moment. "You know what?" My voice was eerily calm. "Fine. Enjoy your Christmas." Mark's grin widened, like he'd won some petty game. But I wasn't done. I took a slow step forward, forcing him to straighten up slightly. "And don't expect to hear from me again." His smile faltered. I turned and walked away without another word, climbed into my car, and pulled away from the house I'd once called home. There was no yelling, no arguing, just silence. And, strangely, relief. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, but heavy. The streets were lined with twinkling lights, homes filled with laughter and warmth. But I wasn't part of that world. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the chill from outside seeping through my jacket. I should have been fuming. I should have been hurt. And maybe in a way, I was. But more than anything, I was numb. I'd given this family everything, and they had given me nothing but an exit. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my knuckles were stiff from the cold. The place was modest, a one-bedroom in a part of town that didn't have the best reputation, but it was mine. I had worked my ass off to afford it, scraped together every dime while still supporting my brother and his family. But apparently, that made me selfish. I kicked the door shut behind me, tossing my keys onto the counter. The silence of my apartment pressed in around me. No decorations, no scent of cinnamon or pine, just the dull hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the floor beneath my steps. "Merry Christmas." I flopped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed. For a second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe Mom had come to her senses. Maybe Dad had finally found his backbone. I glanced at the screen. A message from Mark. "Grow up, Eric. This is what happens when you don't put family first. Enjoy your pity party." I clenched my jaw. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could fire back, unleash years of pent-up frustration in a single message. But what was the point? Instead, I blocked his number. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I blocked my parents too. If they wanted me gone, they could have exactly that. I turned off my phone, grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, and poured myself a drink. The first sip burned, but it was a different kind of warmth. Not the kind I'd been craving, but at least it didn't hurt. I spent Christmas alone, and it was the best one I'd had in years. 2 days passed. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I had never existed. And then, just when I started to believe they had truly washed their hands of me, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to pick up. Hello? A hesitant voice came through the line. Eric? I froze. Natalie? There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I need to see you. It's important. I sat up, my senses instantly on high alert. Natalie and I had never been particularly close, but she wasn't cruel. Unlike Mark, she never mocked me, never openly took part in the way my family dismissed me. But she also never intervened. She just existed in the background, watching it all happen. And now she was calling me, days after I had been kicked out of Christmas like a stray dog. What's going on? I asked. She hesitated. I heard shuffling, like she was making sure no one was listening. I don't want to say over the phone. Can we meet? I glanced at the clock. It was past 10 at night. Now? Yes. Something about the urgency in her voice sent a chill through me. I grabbed my keys. Where? Coffee shop. The one by the old train station. That was 15 minutes away. I was already heading for the door. I'll be there. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a tired-looking barista wiping down tables and an old man hunched over a newspaper. Natalie sat in the farthest booth, bundled up in a thick coat, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She looked different. Not just tired, nervous, jumpy. I slid into the seat across from her. Okay, what's going on? She exhaled sharply, as if trying to gather the courage to speak. I didn't know, she finally said. I frowned. Didn't know what? She looked up, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression I had never seen before. Guilt. I didn't know Mark was using you, she admitted. Not like that. I stiffened. What are you talking about? She swallowed hard, her grip tightening around the cup. Eric, it wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about you helping with rent or covering for him when he screwed up. Mark, he's been lying to you. I folded my arms, leaning back slightly. Be specific. She hesitated. The money you gave him? The thousands you sent over the years? My stomach twisted. Yeah, it wasn't for bills. The air in the coffee shop suddenly felt colder. Then what was it for? Natalie looked around, lowering her voice. He's been gambling. I stared at her. You're joking. She shook her head. I wish I was. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process what she was saying. The endless requests for help, the emergencies, the sob stories about keeping the family afloat. It had all been a lie? Natalie bit her lip. I found out last week. He's in deep, Eric. Really deep. He owes people money, dangerous people. That's why he didn't want you around at Christmas. He knew if you found out, you'd cut him off for good. A bitter laugh escaped me. Well, too late for that. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. No, Eric, you don't understand. I frowned. What? She leaned forward, lowering her voice even more. He used your name. I went still. What? Natalie swallowed hard. On loans. On credit lines. I don't know how, but he did it. He forged something, maybe got someone to help him. But Eric... Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table. The debt isn't just his. It's yours too. The world tilted. I stared at her, my heart hammering in my chest. Mark hadn't just used me. He had buried me with him. The words didn't fully register at first. He what? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Natalie gripped her coffee cup so hard I thought it might shatter. Mark took out loans in your name. A lot of them. A strange ringing filled my ears. My heartbeat slammed in my chest, too loud, too fast. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't some petty family drama, some entitled brother mooching off me until I finally said no. This was fraud. This was a crime. My fingers dug into the table as I leaned forward, my voice deadly calm. How long have you known? Natalie flinched at the accusation in my tone. I only found out a few days ago. I was looking through some paperwork and saw a bunch of unfamiliar charges. At first, I thought it was just more gambling debt, but then I saw your name. Eric, I swear. I had no idea before that. I forced myself to breathe, to think through the storm of rage building inside me. How much are we talking? She swallowed hard. Almost 40,000. I nearly laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. 40,000. She nodded. And that's just what I found. There could be more. My hands curled into fists. Mark had stolen from me before. He had manipulated, guilt, and used me. But this was next level. This was irreversible. He used my identity, I muttered, mostly to myself. Natalie nodded. Yes. He signed my name on legal documents. Yes. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. Okay. I needed to think. I needed to be rational. But all I could see was red. Natalie shifted uncomfortably. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But you need to be careful. I snapped my head up. Careful? Of what? She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. The people he owes money to. A cold chill crawled down my spine. What do you mean? Natalie lowered her eyes, gripping her coat like she was trying to make herself smaller. He didn't just take out bank loans, Eric. He borrowed from other people. I stared at her. Loan sharks, she said softly. A bitter taste coated my tongue. Jesus Christ. She nodded. I think that's why he was so aggressive about cutting you off. He's spiraling, Eric. He's desperate. Desperate people make stupid decisions. I had spent years of my life cleaning up Mark's messes, but this was on a whole different level. This wasn't something I could just walk away from. And now, thanks to him, I wasn't just dealing with a broken family. I was dealing with dangerous people who thought I owed them money. I ran a hand down my face, trying to steady my breathing. Have you talked to him? Natalie let out a humorless laugh. Talk to him? He won't even look at me. Ever since I found out, he's been pretending like nothing's wrong. But I know he's scared. He gets these calls late at night, steps outside to answer them. I think he's in real trouble. Good. I wanted him in trouble. I wanted him to face the consequences of everything he'd done. But at the same time, I had to be smart about this. Natalie, I said, my voice level, I need you to be honest with me. Am I in danger? She bit her lip. I don't know. Which meant yes. I exhaled through my nose. All right. First things first, I need proof. Do you still have those papers? She nodded. I brought copies. She reached into her bag and slid a manila folder across the table. I hesitated for only a second before flipping it open. My stomach twisted. My name, forged over and over. On contracts, on credit applications, even on receipts for cash withdrawals. It was all there in black and white. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. This bastard. Natalie watched me carefully. What are you going to do? What was I going to do? The answer was obvious. I'm going to make sure he never does this again. She looked worried. Eric, I don't mean anything violent, I cut in, but I'm not just letting this go. I slammed the folder shut. I'm going to the cops. Her face paled. Are you sure that's a good idea? I stared at her. What other choice do I have? She hesitated. If Mark finds out. I don't give a damn what Mark finds out. My voice was sharp. I'm done protecting him. He stole from me, Natalie. He dragged my name into this mess. And now I might have dangerous people thinking I owe them money? I shook my head. No, I'm not letting this slide. She sighed, rubbing her arms like she was suddenly cold. I don't blame you. Good. I pushed the folder into my bag. Then you should get yourself and the kid's out of there before he drags you down with him. She looked away, eyes filled with something complicated. I know. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "Be careful, Eric." I nodded. She stood up, hesitated like she wanted to say more, then shook her head and walked out. I stayed in that coffee shop for another 5 minutes, staring at the folder in front of me. Then I grabbed my coat, stepped outside into the cold, and headed for the police station. I was done playing the fool. Mark was about to learn that the hard way. The walk to the police station felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of the folder in my bag, pressing against my side like a reminder of just how deep Mark had buried me. Maybe it was the lingering cold in the air, biting at my skin like it wanted to keep me from going inside. Or maybe it was the sinking realization that once I walked through those doors, there was no coming back from this. I wasn't just cutting Mark off this time. I was burning the bridge. The station was quiet when I stepped inside, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like something was waiting to happen. A bored-looking officer sat behind the desk, tapping at a keyboard with one hand and nursing a coffee with the other. I cleared my throat. I need to file a report. Fraud. The officer barely glanced up. You got evidence? I pulled the folder from my bag and set it on the counter. Plenty. That got his attention. An hour later, I was sitting in a small, windowless office across from a detective named Ramirez. He was older, mid-50s maybe, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense expression. He had flipped through the folder twice now, making occasional notes, his brows furrowing deeper with each passing page. When he finally set the papers down, he let out a slow breath. You sure about this? I crossed my arms. Would I be here if I wasn't? Ramirez studied me for a long moment. Your brother. He got any priors? Nothing on record, but he's always been a screw-up. The detective nodded, tapping his pen against the desk. Well, I can tell you right now, this isn't small-time fraud. 40 grand? That's serious. If we dig deeper and find more, he's looking at felony charges. Good. Ramirez leaned back. That being said, cases like this take time. We'll have to verify the documents, check the banks, and see if we can track down where the money went. I nodded. What do I need to do? For now, nothing. We'll handle the investigation. His gaze sharpened. But I need to ask, has your brother made any threats? Anything that makes you think he'd come after you if he finds out you're pressing charges? I thought about Natalie's warning, the way Mark had cut me off so aggressively, the calls he was getting late at night, the people he owed. No, I lied. Ramirez narrowed his eyes, like he didn't quite believe me, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he slid a card across the table. If anything changes, call me. I took it, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Then I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of the station. It was done. I had set something in motion that Mark wouldn't be able to talk his way out of. And for the first time in years, I felt something dangerously close to satisfaction. That feeling lasted less than 24 hours. The next evening, I was in my apartment, halfway through reheating some takeout, when the pounding started. Not a knock. A fist slamming against my door. I knew who it was before I even got up. I pulled the door open to find Mark standing there, his face twisted with something between fury and desperation. He looked rough, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled like he hadn't changed in days. I barely had time to register his appearance before he shoved his way inside. What the hell did you do? His voice was sharp, laced with something raw. I shut the door behind him, forcing myself to stay calm. I could ask you the same thing. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. Jesus, Eric. The cops? You went to the goddamn cops? I folded my arms. You stole from me, Mark. He scoffed. It's not like I drained your bank account. It was a couple of loans, and I cut him off. In my name. He flinched. I took a step forward, my voice lowering. You forged my signature. You took out 40 grand in loans under my name. Do you even realize what you've done? Mark's jaw clenched. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. His hands curled into fists. You don't understand. Then make me understand. He stopped pacing, his face contorting into something unreadable. Then, to my shock, his shoulders sagged. "I'm in deep, man," he muttered. I waited. He exhaled sharply. It started small, just a few bets here and there. But I kept losing, and I thought, if I could just win big once, I could fix everything. I could get ahead. But it didn't happen. And then I owed too much. I clenched my jaw. "So you dragged me into it?" His eyes flickered with something like shame. "I didn't think it would go this far." "Bullshit." His gaze snapped up. I took another step toward him. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew I'd never agree to help you dig your way out of a gambling hole, so you didn't ask. You stole. And now that it's catching up to you, you're acting like you're the victim." Mark's face darkened. "You don't get it, Eric. These people, they don't forgive debts. They don't take 'I'm working on it' as an answer." A shiver crawled down my spine. "Who?" I asked. Mark hesitated. I repeated myself, my tone sharper. "Who do you owe?" His throat bobbed. "Doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't." He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I just need more time. If you tell the cops to drop it, I can fix this." I barked out a laugh. "You want me to drop it? Are you insane?" His jaw tightened. "Eric, I swear, I'll make it right." I shook my head. "No, Mark. You won't. You never do. And I'm done being the idiot who believes you will." Something flickered in his eyes. Something cold. "You think you're safe," he muttered. A slow chill crept through my veins. "What?" His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They think you're involved, Eric. You might not have borrowed from them, but your name's on the loans. And if they can't get their money from me..." I felt my pulse stutter. "You're saying they'll come after me?" Mark didn't answer. I took a step back. "Get out." He hesitated. I pointed at the door. "Now." For a moment, I thought he was going to fight me on it. But then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me standing there, heart hammering, hands shaking. This wasn't over. Mark was spiraling. And now? I was caught in the crossfire. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, staring at the locked door, my mind running through every possible scenario. Mark's warning played over and over in my head. "They think you're involved." I had gone to the police, and I had done the right thing. But that didn't change the fact that someone, somewhere, thought I owed them 40 grand. And I had no idea who they were. I tried to tell myself that it was just a scare tactic, that Mark was trying to manipulate me into backing down. But the way his voice had wavered, the sheer panic in his eyes, it felt real. Too real. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. It took some digging, but I found it. Mark's gambling trail. I started with the bank statements Natalie had given me, then cross-referenced them with his known contacts. It wasn't hard. Mark was careless. Too many of his transactions linked to sketchy betting sites, online casinos, and wire transfers to names I didn't recognize. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. A payment, $5,000, sent to a name I did recognize. Vincent D'Angelo. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had heard that name before. Not in casual conversation, but whispered. Vincent D'Angelo wasn't some bookie running a neighborhood betting ring. He was worse. A fixer. A collector. The kind of guy you only dealt with if you were truly desperate. And my brother had put my name on a loan from him. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. This wasn't just bad. This was dangerous. I had been willing to let Mark rot in whatever hellhole he had dug for himself. But now I was directly in the line of fire. And I had to do something. I spent the next few hours debating my options. The police were already involved, but they were focused on the fraud. They weren't going to protect me from a guy like D'Angelo, which left me with two choices: run, or face it head-on. I chose the latter. It wasn't bravery. It was necessity. If I didn't deal with this now, it would follow me. I wasn't about to spend the next year looking over my shoulder, waiting for a knock on my door in the middle of the night. So I did something incredibly stupid. I went looking for Vincent D'Angelo. I found him at a bar on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where no one asked questions, where the lights were dim enough to hide the kind of business being conducted in the back booths. The moment I stepped inside, I felt every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around. But I didn't. Instead, I walked straight to the man sitting in the farthest booth. Vincent D'Angelo was in his 50s, but he didn't look soft. His build was thick, solid, like a man who had worked with his hands before realizing fear did the job better. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, his dark eyes assessing as he slowly sipped from a glass of whiskey. He didn't react when I stopped at his table. He just lifted his gaze. "You're not my usual company." I swallowed. "I need to talk to you." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Then sit." I did. For a moment, he just studied me, his fingers tapping lightly against the rim of his glass. Then he leaned back. "You're Mark's brother." Not a question. I nodded. "Yeah." Vincent tilted his head. "So what's this? You coming to pay off his debt?" I took a steady breath. "No." His mouth twitched, almost amused. "Then why are you here?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "Because Mark lied. He took out that money using my name, without my permission. I didn't borrow a dime from you." Vincent hummed, considering. "That's so?" I nodded. "And I can prove it." I placed a copy of the forged documents on the table. He barely glanced at them. Instead, he smirked. "You think a couple of papers change the fact that someone still owes me 40 grand? My pulse hammered. "Then take it from him." "Not me." Vincent exhaled through his nose, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "See, that's not how this works, kid. You know how many sob stories I hear? My cousin stole my cash. My friend borrowed it without asking. My girlfriend ran off with my credit card. You think that matters?" I didn't move. "It does when it's the truth." For the first time, his expression darkened. Truth doesn't pay debts. A slow, creeping dread settled in my gut. He wasn't going to let me walk away. I was in this, whether I wanted to be or not. But I had one last card to play. "Mark's under police investigation," I said quietly. "Fraud. Identity theft. It's already in motion. If something happens to me, that investigation expands." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. I pressed on. "You think the cops won't start asking questions if I suddenly disappear? If I suddenly end up in a ditch somewhere?" I shook my head. "I'm a loose end, and I'm willing to bet you don't like loose ends." The silence stretched. Then Vincent exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You got balls. I'll give you that." I said nothing. He studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Here's the deal, kid. I don't give a damn about family drama. I give a damn about my money." He lifted his whiskey, took a sip. "But I also don't like wasting time chasing people who aren't worth the effort." He set his glass down. "So I'll make you a deal." I tensed. "What kind of deal? You want to be done with this? You get me something better." I frowned. "Better?" Vincent smiled, slow and sharp. "Mark's a waste of space, but guys like him, they know people. People I care about." He tapped the table. "You bring me something useful, something I can use, and I'll forget your names on that loan." The air in my lungs felt thin. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for information. I swallowed. "How do I know you'll hold up your end?" Vincent's smile didn't falter. "Because I'm a businessman, kid. And a smart businessman doesn't make enemies he doesn't need." I hesitated. Then, slowly, I nodded. I didn't shake his hand. I didn't thank him. I just stood up and walked out. And as I stepped into the cold night air, one thought ran through my mind. I had just made a deal with the devil, and I had no idea how I was going to hold up my end. I drove home in silence. My mind was a storm, thoughts colliding like debris in a hurricane. I had just sat across from a man who could make people disappear, and I had promised him something I didn't even have yet. Mark had dragged me into the deep end, and now I had to figure out how to swim before I drowned. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night going through everything I knew about Mark's life. The people he surrounded himself with, the favors he owed, the deals he made when he thought no one was paying attention. I wasn't a snitch, but this wasn't about loyalty. This was survival. By the next morning, I had a plan. I needed leverage, and there was only one person who could give it to me. Natalie. I met her at a small diner just outside of town. It was nearly empty, The kind of place where no one cared if you stayed for hours nursing a cup of coffee. She looked exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and the bags under her eyes told me she hadn't been sleeping much either. She barely waited for me to sit before leaning in. What happened? I told her everything. The police report, the meeting with Vincent, the deal. By the time I finished, her face was pale. Oh my God, she whispered. Yeah. I rubbed my hands over my face. I don't have time, Nat. I need something. Anything. She hesitated, biting her lip. Mark doesn't tell me everything. He's careful. I shook my head. Not careful enough. You knew about the gambling. You knew about the fraud. There has to be more. She was silent for a long moment. Then she exhaled sharply. There's something, but it's bad. I leaned forward. I need bad. Natalie swallowed hard. There's a guy, Daniel Ortiz. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't place it. Who is he? Mark used to work with him, kind of. She glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. Daniel runs, well, I guess you could call it a side business. Stolen merchandise. Electronics. Watches. Sometimes even cars. It's all under the table. No paper trail. But Mark? He used to help him move the stuff. I inhaled sharply. He was fencing stolen goods? She nodded. I don't know how involved he was, but I know he got a cut for setting up deals. This was it. This was what Vincent wanted. I clenched my jaw. Where can I find this guy? Natalie hesitated. Eric, if you give Vincent Ortiz's name, that's not just throwing Mark under the bus. That's throwing someone dangerous under it. Are you sure about this? I didn't hesitate. I don't have a choice. She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. He hangs around the old warehouse district on the east side. There's a bar there, the Iron Gate. He runs things out of the back. I took a deep breath. Thank you. Natalie grabbed my wrist before I could stand. Eric, be careful. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for herself. For me. I squeezed her hand, then left. The Iron Gate was exactly the kind of place I expected. Dark, smoky, with a low buzz of conversation that never rose above a murmur. I walked in, trying to blend into the background, scanning the faces until I found the man I was looking for. Daniel Ortiz. He was younger than I expected, late 30s maybe, dressed sharp in a dark leather jacket. His crew surrounded him, 2 guys at his back, another leaning against the bar. I didn't have time to hesitate. I walked straight up to him. He looked up, unimpressed. You lost? I shook my head. No, but you will be. That got his attention. His gaze sharpened. Who the hell are you? I leaned in. I know about Mark. I know what he did for you. And I know the cops are already sniffing around him. Ortiz's expression darkened. You threatening me? I kept my voice calm. I'm warning you. Mark is a loose end. You know it. I know it. And soon, Vincent D'Angelo will know it too. The name sent a ripple through the air. The guys behind Ortiz stiffened. I pressed on. I don't care what happens to Mark, but I do care what happens to me. And right now, he's my biggest problem. Ortiz studied me, his jaw ticking. Then he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. You're a smart guy, he said, swirling the drink in his glass. But smart guys don't walk into places like this without knowing the cost. I met his gaze. I know the cost, and I'm willing to pay it. Ortiz tapped his fingers against the table. All right, you want Mark gone? Fine, but you didn't hear it from me. I nodded. Then I turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on my back the whole time. I met Vincent the next night. This time, when I slid into the booth, I didn't hesitate. I put a slip of paper on the table. Vincent picked it up, his lips curling as he read it. Ortiz. I nodded. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled. You really don't give a damn about your brother, do you? I didn't answer. Vincent tapped the paper against the table. This is useful. More useful than I expected. He slid the slip into his pocket, then leaned back, his gaze assessing. Congratulations, kid. You're free. I exhaled, only now realizing how tense I had been. Vincent stood, finishing his drink in one smooth motion. One last piece of advice. I looked up. Disappear. His voice was low, but firm. The people who get away with shit like this, they don't stick around. They don't wait to see the fallout. I nodded once. Vincent walked away. I didn't stay long either. By the next morning, I had packed my bags. I didn't tell Natalie. I didn't tell anyone. I just left. And I never looked back. I drove through the night, the city lights shrinking in my rearview mirror until they were nothing but distant memories. I didn't have a plan. Not really. Just an old duffel bag, a full tank of gas, and the kind of resolve that only comes when you've got nothing left to lose. Vincent was right. The smart move was to disappear. So that's exactly what I did. The first few days felt surreal. No calls. No messages. No frantic knocks on my door from Mark, demanding another lifeline. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next crisis to land in my lap. I should have felt relief, but a part of me still braced for impact. I knew Mark wouldn't go down quietly. He never did. I was right. A week after I left town, I got a message from Natalie. Natalie, I don't know where you are, but you need to know. Mark is gone. I stared at the screen. My heartbeat slowed, thudding heavy in my chest. Gone. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. Natalie, I said, my voice tight. What happened? She let out a shaky breath. I don't know everything, but 2 nights ago, he came home in a panic. Said he needed to pack, that he was getting out before they found him. I clenched my jaw. Did he say who? She hesitated. No, but I know Vincent made his move. And I know Ortiz isn't the kind of guy to let things slide. A cold weight settled in my gut. Mark wasn't running. Mark was hiding. And if he was hiding, it meant he knew something bad was coming. Natalie sighed. He asked me for money. I closed my eyes. And I said no. Her voice was firm. For the first time, I said no. Good. It wouldn't change what was coming for him, but at least she had finally drawn a line. I exhaled through my nose. Where is he now? I don't know. He left in the middle of the night. Took cash, left his phone behind. It's like he disappeared. I swallowed. That wasn't like Mark. Mark was a lot of things. Reckless, selfish, arrogant. But he wasn't the kind of guy to ditch his entire life overnight. Not unless he had to. And if he had to, it meant someone was closing in. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Natalie spoke again. Softer this time. Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer that. Was I okay? Mark had destroyed everything I had built. He had stolen my name, my future, my peace of mind. He had put me in the kind of danger I hadn't even realized existed until it was too late. And yet, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not relief. Just nothing. I will be, I said finally. Natalie sighed. I hope so. There was another pause. Then, almost hesitantly, she said, I think you were right to leave. I ran a hand over my face. I didn't have a choice. I know, she murmured, but still. Another beat of silence. Then, softly, thank you, Eric. I frowned. For what? For getting out. She swallowed. For not letting him take you down with him. I rubbed the back of my neck. I just did what I had to do. Yeah, she said, but not everyone would have had the strength to do it. I didn't have an answer for that. So I just said, take care of yourself, Nat. You too. And then the line went dead. I never heard from Mark again. Maybe he ran. Maybe someone caught up to him before he could. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. What I did know was that I wasn't going back. Not to the city. Not to my parents. Not to the version of me that spent his whole life cleaning up other people's messes. That person was gone. That person had died the night Mark locked me out of my own family's house, shivering on a porch with gift bags cutting into my hands. I was someone new now. Someone free. And that was worth more than anything Mark had ever stolen from me.